Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan and the Acolyte show is finally over, and I feel like something kind of went over everyone's head, and it's the last scene of the show. Once people understand the ramifications of this one scene, I think it's going to piss off a lot of fans, like really piss off fans, especially the ones from the original trilogy era. And it has to do with Grandmaster Yoda. The Acolyte, for those of you who don't know, is a show about an assassin going after 4 Jedi who are once stationed on a world known as Brendok.
I've been here for 7 weeks.
So eventually these 4 Jedi stumble upon a witch coven's fortress, and let's just say both sides don't really trust each other.
The Jedi are back.
A force cult here.
I think they're witches.
There is some general incompetence on the Jedi side, along with fear, and some extreme voices on the witches side, along with fear, and a giant fire engulfs the fortress that they live in. Most likely because said fortress was actually just a sketchy-ass abandoned mining depot outside of Republic space where you don't get inspectors checking out for things like fire suppression systems. Also, Osha was still young at the time and had not reached her full regulatory powers. But anyway, the point is, the Jedi screwed up really badly. And one of the survivors of said fire becomes an assassin who wants revenge against those 4 Jedi. And this leads to some shenanigans, including the appearance of what seems like an apprentice to an actual Rule of 2 era Sith Lord. Now, this entire situation on the Jedi side was being handled by the very unorthodox Jedi Master known as Veresta Ro. She is responsible for covering up the entire assassination situation from the rest of the Jedi Order and High Council.
We must alert the High Council.
The High Council would be obliged to inform the Senate. A scandal like this would inspire fear and mistrust. We should handle this ourselves.
So I initially read Veresta Ro as an untrustworthy individual who was doing all of this for potentially more selfish reasons than she let on. We then came to suspect that the Sith apprentice who was training the assassin Chimere was most likely a former student of Veresta Ro's. Those scars on his back really do match up well with her lightsaber whip, and thus my mistrust of her rose even more. But then we find out 2 crucial factors that perhaps motivate her, and the plot thickens. One is that Veresta Ro was actually given authority to cover up this assassination attempt.
I'm keeping this internal for the moment. I have the authority to take independent action if there's no larger threat.
So I actually understand her a bit more here if she is actually a part of a larger attempt by the Jedi Order to, basically stop a much greater threat, which we'll talk about later. But basically, I came to realize that Veresta Ro is the individual the Jedi call on when they don't want to get their own hands dirty, and so they have her do the dirty things. It's like those Mennonites the Amish depend on whenever they need to interact with evil technology like a car or a phone. Now, one of you guys in the comments section actually mentioned that Veresta Ro is kind of like a Jedi Shadow from the Old Republic era. That comes from the Old Republic MMO games. Shadows basically work with the Council of First Knowledge, one of the 4 councils that govern the Jedi Order, and they focus on eradicating any Sith artifacts, cults, or even followers. They're basically the Jedi's version of the Inquisitorius. They're supposed to hunt down dark side Force users, and given the importance and gravity of their position, they are given extra powers. In the last episode, when we're seeing her carry out her investigation, we even see that she has her own special office that's in a tower overlooking the rest of the Jedi Order in a separate building. Now, the second thing we find out about Veresta Ro is at the end of the show, the scene we mentioned before. She actually reports to Grandmaster Yoda, most likely about what's happened here.
Sorry to disturb you, Master. We need to talk.
This is where the huge controversy comes in. This is what I feel like fans should actually be upset about if they are upset about any lore issues in the Acolytes. I mean, people are more upset about Ki-Adi-Mundi's age getting changed from an obscure Legends, fact from back in the day, which is, stupid. They should be more upset about Darth Plagueis' age being changed. That's far more important and a more well-established piece of lore. And the same goes for the people who are upset that Ki-Adi-Mundi's working with Veresta Ro's working group here to basically cover up the entire assassination attempt, simply because he has this quote in the prequels.
My only conclusion can be that it was a Sith Lord.
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
Here's the thing though. No one in that working group knows what they're actually dealing with. Only Veresta Ro really understands that there's potentially a Sith here. For all they know, they just think it's a rogue Jedi or a dark side Force user. And even then, Veresta Ro only suspects that there's a Sith involved because her own apprentice Chimere reappears. And even then, that's still a big if. What is worrying is that Veresta Ro is going to Yoda with this information. because considering the direction where the show is going with the reveal of Darth Plagueis, this means that Yoda very likely understands that the Sith have indeed returned during this period, which makes this statement he says after Ki-Adi-Mundi's quote in the prequels far more insidious. Insidious. Darth Sidious. Wait.
The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
Ah, hard to see the dark side is.
That's not just Yoda being neutral, because that's what I originally thought. Here's a wise old Jedi Master with, almost 1,000 years of experience. He's probably seen everything and knows better to speak in absolutes. But now I'm starting to think that Yoda here actually knows a lot more than he's letting on. Let's take a look at the second quote at the end of the film when it's revealed that Maul in fact was a Sith.
There's no doubt the mysterious warrior was a Sith.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
People used to ask me, how does Yoda know about this? And I used to think to myself, well, maybe Yoda asked the Council of First Knowledge for information. Or maybe there's a holocron in the restricted section of the archives that, Yoda used the invisibility cloak to get to. And that had all the secrets about the Rule of Two era Sith. I mean, he did, talk to the spirit of Darth Bane in the Clone Wars before Episode 3, right? But the other side to that is that, Darth Bane created the Rule of Two in secret, after he manipulated the Brotherhood of Darkness into mass suiciding themselves. And ever since, there have only been 2, at most 3 or 4 Sith at a time who know about this Rule of Two thing. And I don't think the Sith were stupid enough to write down what the Rule of Two era was in holocrons or in text. So I think the only way the Jedi could actually find out about the Rule of Two era Sith is by capturing one of them and interrogating them. And judging again by the events of the Acolyte, it's very possible that this is the moment where it happens in a hypothetical season 2. And regardless of whether you think the Acolyte is good or just complete trash, at this point I don't really care anymore. Stop sending me death threats in my messages. I don't care which side of the culture war you think I'm on. No, what I actually care about is the possibility of watching Yoda and his green-skinned colleague Veresta Ro seeking out the Sith threat. That's extremely enticing to me, because that actually shows us that Yoda doesn't necessarily trust the Jedi Order, and definitely not the Republic. This makes him a much more complicated figure than that wise hermit we saw in Empire and Return. And so yeah, I would understand why original fans would be angry, because this would make Yoda, the paragon of the light side, a much more fallible character. But again, George Lucas himself decided to take this route when he further explored the Jedi in the prequels. If you want more content about a mystical organization of perfect good guys who are just a symbolic representation of good in an older film, know that they only stay paragons of the light side when you don't peek underneath the robe. In general, don't peek under anyone's robe unless, they're a consenting adult you have a relationship with, or it's a stranger that wants to offer you candy. But yeah, there's no such thing as perfect characters or people when you do a deep dive into a story. There's just no point in writing such characters because it's not interesting. No one wants to know about a perfect individual. At best, a perfect character can only serve as a supporting character like Obi-Wan or Yoda did in Star Wars. They're supposed to mentor, they're supposed to serve as a symbol, but you get any deeper into them, you're going to have to see flaws because they are living, breathing creatures. Otherwise, they would be completely unbelievable. And so if you send her a show around the Jedi, they're going to be messed up. They're going to have flaws. They're going to do things wrong. But they can still be good guys. Because in the Acolyte, the Jedi are still clearly good guys. Anyway, I digress. 4 to 5 years ago, the Clone Wars series, the last season came out, and I was talking a lot about the Jedi during that time period. I was doing deep dives into what the Jedi Order was thinking. I'm really proud of this thumbnail here. And I came to a realization that the Jedi, more or less, at least the top members, probably saw Order 66 coming, or at least they sensed that it was going to happen. It's simply too hard for them not to connect the dots. There was Sifo Dyas's role in the creation of the clone army, which led to the revelation that Count Dooku was involved in this, who was also, a Sith Lord. I mean, you would think the Jedi would start panicking that the Sith ordered their military force that was watching their back. And then there was also the inhibitor chip incident with Tub. I mean, you link everything together, it's just it's a no-brainer that the Jedi knew. And so I made this argument that basically Yoda had no choice but to carry on anyway, because if the Jedi had suddenly said, no, I'm not fighting this war anymore, and withdrawn their troops from the front, Palpatine would have either triggered Order 66, or maybe called them treasonous. He would have certainly had right to. I mean, we're talking about going AWOL from the military. That is a crime. Or the public simply would have turned against the Jedi at that point, because public sentiment was already pretty poor against them, and again, they would be seen as abandoning their posts and not defending the Republic. And again, Palpatine could have easily spun this as, they're doing something selfish, something bad. Basically, Palpatine had maneuvered the Jedi into a kill box, and there was really no way out for Yoda, and so he kind of just pushed on. He sat there in the car, in the Hellcat most likely, it's always a Hellcat, as it goes careening into a highway divider. I think with this recent reveal at the end of the Acolyte, we can finally see how the Jedi actually got to this point where they were stuck. In my opinion, this would make Yoda a far more interesting character because there's a huge disconnect in the lore right now. If Yoda is supposed to be perfect, if he's supposed to be the paragon of the light side, then why is the Jedi Order he presides over so problematic and lost in the prequels? It's clear that as the Grandmaster and the Master of the Order, the leader of the High Council, the Jedi lost their way under his leadership. It was his choice to fight in the Clone Wars. Do or do not, there is no try, and that's what Yoda did. He did, and he messed up, and he has to own up for his mistakes, and I want to know how he got to where he did. Again, it's not because Yoda's evil. I like Yoda a lot, but as we see in the Acolyte, even good characters can make huge mistakes, especially when they're confronted with a no-win situation. Sometimes the only thing you can do as a leader is choose the lesser evil. I remember when George Bush plunged our country into a war in Afghanistan, when we clearly should have just used special forces to hunt down bin Laden. And a lot of people in hindsight will criticize Bush. I clearly do all the time. We screwed up our country, we screwed up our standing in the world, we became like, the very evil we were trying to fight, right? But what people forget is at the time, people wanted blood. Americans wanted blood. This is what bin Laden set out to do. He wanted to make Americans fearful, angry, and go crazy, and waste resources, waste, the lives of some of our most talented, brightest young folks, and just kill a bunch of innocent people also on the other side of the world for no fucking reason. But people wanted blood at the time. There were attacks against Sikhs in gas stations because people thought they were Muslim. Our country was ripping itself apart, and I think had Bush not gone into Afghanistan, it would have been political suicide. I'm not excusing him for what he did, but this is just what it is, sometimes you're just put into these situations, and it's terrible. And I wish more people had empathy for, believe it or not, world leaders when they're facing these decisions, because oftentimes it's not good or evil. It's just normal people facing shitty choices. It's incompetence, not intent. And I would argue that Yoda was in the same situation with the breakout of the Clone Wars. If the Jedi didn't act, the Republic would have been extremely upset. They would have turned against the Jedi. And I think that Yoda can even make the case in the Acolyte for not telling the wider Jedi Order that there's this potential Sith conspiracy. But I just want to see it happen, I want to see it on screen. I think really this is what the Acolyte could have been, the second season at least. Yoda investigating first the Senate. Because as we know in the Darth Plagueis novels, Darth Plagueis wasn't just a, simple shoot lightning out of his fingers kind of Sith. He was a master plotter. He was more of a mastermind of Order 66 than Darth Sidious was anyways. Darth Sidious was a chaotic guy, and we see once he kills Darth Plagueis, once he wins, he returns his old chaotic ways. But Darth Plagueis, he was really smart. He knew that if he could control the money, he could control the system. And he actually had all these different lobby groups basically get control of various senators. And this is how he gradually took over the Republic. I want to see Yoda investigate these things. There's a lot more moral and political complexity that can be discussed in such a show. Imagine an Acolyte show that really takes on darker and more seedier tones as Yoda and Veresta descend into the Coruscant underworld as they try to figure out where Chimera and Darth Plagueis are actually hiding by following dark side Sith money, because it's probably everywhere at this point in the galaxy. And the reason why Yoda can't let anyone know about this, the reason why he can't let the wider Jedi Order know about this, is because there's bad actors everywhere, even inside the Jedi Order potentially, working as support personnel. And there are definitely senators that are corrupted and against the Jedi. Senator Rancourt might secretly be a Rancor. And he also might be secretly in the pockets of the dark side. Perhaps in that last scene, Veresta Ro reveals that Chimera is still alive, and then Yoda, after a dramatic pause, says, "I know." And then it reveals his own conspiracy, which he's drawn on the wall with crayons, connecting mining corporations with political lobbying groups and senators, and maybe there's an ashtray in the corner with a bunch of death sticks that he smoked through, and maybe he has bottles of pee collecting in the corner. You know, at the end of the day, guys, I'm just a true prequel fan. I know some of you guys might not think I am, but I like the prequels a lot more than the original trilogy because of nostalgia, but because I also love campy, massive amounts of information and huge information dumps like the Clone Wars. I mean, I could totally analyze stuff and look at deep things and like find metaphors and all that kind of stuff, but you know, at the core, man, I'm really just the bro who likes explosions, ships, and weapons, and like clones. Like that's what I'm into. I'm also really into the political drama, right? And so, like, this whole idea of Yoda uncovering the hidden Sith through the political system, I mean, I would love to see that, because I think there's actually really a reason why they should be telling the story. I mean, it really does connect to our own world and just the seediness of how a lot of deals are made, you know, behind the curtains, outside of public knowledge. I mean, there's a lot of things going on during the Republic prequel era that is just really exciting and something I've always wanted to see in live action. So, like, yeah, there's a part of me that's just pissed off, like, there's all this culture war stuff going on, because this is sort of what I felt like all the fans wanted. But maybe I'm wrong, because, again, a lot of times the things I like, no one else likes. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, the democracy. I'll see you next time.